Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
So let's continue. So I want to begin by making a correction from lecture 7. Something I said is not completely correct. So Aryaman pointed this out to me. So I stated that if omega is an open subset of C and f is a holomorphic function on omega, then the radius of convergence of the power series expanded around the point z0 in omega is the radius of the largest circle around z0 contained in omega. This is what I had said. Yeah, this is the radius of convergence. Take any point, you expand the power. Holomorphic is same as analytic. So if you expand the power series around any point z0 in omega, take the largest radius of the largest circle around z0, which is contained in omega. That is the radius of convergence. This is what I had said. It's not quite correct. Really what I meant is that the radius of convergence of the power series expanded around z0 is the radius of the largest circle centered around z0 on which f extends as a holomorphic function. The largest circle centered at z0 contained in omega may be smaller. Yeah, so it's the largest circle centered at z0 on which f extends as a holomorphic function. Omega may be a very small open set. Yeah, is the correction clear? So let's take an example. So today we will see many examples. So consider fz equal to e raised to z upon sin z plus cos z. And so let's expand it as a power series centered at 0. So first note that f is holomorphic at 0. Yeah, if you plug in z equal to 0, you get 1. So this is holomorphic at z equal to 0. I mean, yeah. Let me recall one little point here. When I say something is holomorphic at a point, by definition, it means that it's holomorphic in some open neighborhood of that point. If you go back to the first lecture, what does it mean to say that a function is holomorphic at a point z0? It means there is a neighborhood of z, open neighborhood of z0, open set containing z0 on which the function is holomorphic. That is our definition of something being holomorphic at a point. The nearest pole to 0 for this function is when sin z plus cos z is equal to 0. Okay, so the function will continue to be holomorphic as long as this sin z plus cos z stays away from 0, right? So what happens when sin z plus cos z is 0? If I square this, I'll get sin square z plus cos square z plus sin 2z, right? 2 sin z cos z, that is sin 2z equal to 0. Sin square z plus cos square z is equal to 1 by one of the tutorial exercises. So this happens exactly when sin 2z is equal to minus 1. So let's understand when this happens, when sin 2z is equal to minus 1. We will use the fact that sine of x plus iy is sine of cos x, sin x cos hyperbolic y plus I cos x sin hyperbolic y. I'll leave this fact as an exercise and I'll include it in the next tutorial. So this expansion of sine of x plus iy. But we will use this in settling this example. The sine of x plus iy is equal to minus 1 when two things, sin x cos hyperbolic y is equal to minus 1 and cos x sin hyperbolic y is equal to 0. Yeah, just equating the real and imaginary parts. We have sin x cos hyperbolic y is minus 1, cos x sin hyperbolic y is equal to 0. So let's take the second equation, cos x sin hyperbolic y equal to 0. So product of two things is 0. So this either cos x is 0 or sin hyperbolic y is 0. So if cos x is 0, then x is equal to pi by 2 plus or minus pi by 2 plus or minus n pi. These are the values for which cos is 0. We are interested in the nearest value to 0. We are interested in we want to expand this power series around 0. So we are interested in the nearest value to 0 when this happens. So that let's look at the smallest values of x. So plus pi by 2 and minus pi by 2, right? So what happens when x is equal to pi by 2? When x is equal to pi by 2, then sin x is equal to 1. And so sin x cos hyperbolic y is positive. Cos hyperbolic y is e raised to y plus e raised to minus y upon 2, which is always something positive. And now sin x is equal to 1. So sin x cos hyperbolic y becomes positive, and that contradicts the first equation that we got. Sin x cos hyperbolic y equal to minus 1. So x equal to pi by 2 doesn't work. And so so it can never be -1. Sin x cos hyperbolic y cannot be equal to -1. So let's take the other value. When x is equal to -pi/2 and y is equal to 0, then cos x sin hyperbolic y is equal to 0 and sin x cos hyperbolic y is equal to -1. Both equations are satisfied, and so this is the nearest value to 0 for which sin of x plus iy is equal to -1. Analysis when sin hyperbolic y is equal to 0 gives the same result. So we in the second paragraph, third line, we said either cos x is 0 or sin hyperbolic y is equal to 0. Yeah, we analyze the case where cos x is 0. If sin hyperbolic y is 0, you get the same answers. If sin hyperbolic y is equal to 0, then y will be forced to be equal to 0. When y is equal to 0, x is forced to be equal to -pi/2 for both the equations to be satisfied. So you get the same answer when sin hyperbolic y equal to 0. So thus the nearest pole for the function is when sin 2z is equal to -1, and the smallest value of z for which this happens is when z is equal to -pi/4. 2pi is equal to -pi/2, so z equal to -pi/4. Hence the radius of convergence is pi/4. If I take a circle of radius pi/4 around 0, the power series will converge. Is the whole explanation clear? Let me remind you, in case you have forgotten, cos hyperbolic y is e raised to y plus e raised to minus y upon 2. Sin hyperbolic y is e raised to y minus e raised to minus y upon 2.
Sir,
Yeah.
could we also have looked at it at this from the point of view that sin z plus cos z will always be √2 times sin z plus pi/4? Because I mean, it agrees for all real z, so it has to agree for all complex z as well, because of the holomorphicity again.
So sin z plus cos z is equal to, what is the thing that you're saying, is equal to?
Square root of 2 times sin z plus pi/4.
Square root 2 times sin of z plus pi/4?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
So we can prove it
That's
from the
right.
definition as well using the exponential.
That's right. You could have probably done that as well. That's perhaps, yeah, that would be probably another way to analyze it. I had not thought about it that way. Yeah, I just sort of mechanically did the analysis, but perhaps what you're saying will also give another, maybe a quicker argument, perhaps.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, suppose we have a function like sin z upon z.
Yeah.
So that's like analytic everywhere except 0, right?
Yeah. But it can be made analytic even at 0.
Yes. So suppose we define a value at 0 to make it analytic at 0. Say we define it to be 1.
Yeah.
Then also it will remain analytic, right? If we split it
Yeah.
and define it.
In fact, I'm going to discuss this very example later in the lecture today. Today we are going to discuss singularities in the second half. I'm going to discuss exactly this. So yeah, it's good you're anticipating my lecture. I will discuss this point. The recording is going on, right? Can someone confirm?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So let's make a definition. If z0 is a complex number and gamma is any closed contour not passing through z0, then integration 1 upon z minus z0 dz, this is an integer multiple of 2 pi I. Is something we have seen, and this integer is quite suggestively called the winding number of gamma around z0 and counts the number of times the curve winds around z0. So note that this integer can be negative, which happens when the curve winds in the clockwise direction. So it also tells you the direction of winding. So this is called the winding number. It's in some sense you have a contour and you have some point, and it's not so easy. I mean, without complex analysis or using something else, maybe using some or using some more advanced topology, it's not so obvious how you would define winding number. How many times the curve has wound around a parameterized curve has wound around a point. And complex analysis gives you one way. Topology, algebraic topology gives you another way, but we won't go into that. So this number can also be 0. For example, if you go around the point in the anti-clockwise direction and then follow it up by a curve which goes in the clockwise direction, the result will be 0. So this integer can also be 0. After all, gamma is just any closed contour. So this can be practically any integer. Yeah, so this is just a definition. We may not use this again, but it's a good definition to know.
Sir,
Yeah.
can Z not be outside gamma?
Yeah. In which case this will always be 0. That's right. So it's a good point that you have a closed contour and you may have a point outside. You can define inside and outside, roughly speaking, using Jordan curve theorem. Although this is not a simple closed curve, still you can break it up into a union of simple closed curve and talk about inside and outside. And the point is outside the curve, then this number will be 0.
Sir,
Yeah.
sir, can we break any closed curve into finitely many simple closed curves?
Yeah. Closed curve means it's a sort of finite union of smooth. They're like piecewise smooth, and you will be able to break it up into at least. Okay, let's put it this way: at least any reasonably nice closed contour, you can break it up into finitely many. I mean, you you know, it's possible to think of some pathological examples where the number of self intersections are infinitely many. That can happen, but if the curve is sufficiently nice in some sense, then it will break up into finite union. Otherwise, you can have pathologies. I mean, it's true. The curve may sort of self intersect infinitely many times, and then it's not a finite union of simple closed curves, but any reasonably good closed contour will have break up into finitely many union of finitely many simple closed contours. Yeah. Let us now see some computational applications of Cauchy integral formula. So we have seen a few. So recall that if omega is a domain in C and f is a holomorphic function on and inside a simple closed contour gamma, and z0 is an interior point of gamma, then nth derivative at z0 is equal to n factorial upon 2 pi I integration fz dz upon z minus z0 raised to n plus 1. This is what we had. We have seen this from 2 lectures back. In some sense, this is the consequence of equating the two expressions for the coefficients of the power series, one using derivatives and the other as an integral. When you equate the two, this is the expression that you get. This is the equality that you get. And the derivative at z0 is equal to n factorial upon 2 pi I times the integral. So let's begin with a silly example. Let's take integration z square dz upon z minus 1 on mod z equal to 2. So this is just 2 pi I times z square at z equal to 1, right? So this is simply 2 pi I. Let's take example 2. So e raised to z upon z square into z minus 1 dz mod z equal to 2. I'll break this into sum of two integrals around the two poles z equal to 0 and z equal to 1. So this is e raised to z upon z minus 1 upon z square integrated along a small curve around 0 plus integration e raised to z by z square upon z minus 1 integrated on a small curve around 1. So this usual thing which we have discussed again and again, breaking up integral along a large contour into sum of small circles around the poles. So the first one is, again, let's apply the formula from the previous slide. 2 pi I times. So this is the first integral is in the form fz upon z square. So this will be 2 pi I times d by dz of e raised to z upon z minus 1 evaluated at z equal to 0. Plus the second one will be 2 pi I times e raised to z by z square at z equal to 1. So this is now small computation. Use the derivative of u by v rule, and then you compute this is minus 4 pi I plus 2 pi I times e. So this is 2 pi I times e minus 2. Yeah, I'm not showing the steps of the differentiation. All of you can do it better than me. So just differentiate and check. Let's take example 3. So z square minus 4z plus 3 upon z square minus z minus 1 dz on the circle mod z minus 1 equal to 1. So this is integral on this mod z minus 1 equal to 1. Break it up as z square minus z minus 1 minus 3z plus 4 upon this, and that is 1 minus 3z minus 4 upon z square minus z minus 1 dz. Integration 1 dz on 1 on z, mod z minus 1 equal to 1 minus integration mod z minus 1 equal to 1 3z minus 4 upon z square minus z minus 1. This z square minus z minus 1 you can factorize as z minus 1 plus root 5 by 2 into z minus 1 minus root 5 by 2. The first integral is 0 because you are just integrating a holomorphic function on a circle, so that is 0 minus integral mod z minus 1 equal to 1. Now you have to understand which of these 1 plus root 5 by 2 and 1 minus root 5 by 2. Which of them is contained in the circle mod z minus 1 equal to 1? So it turns out that 1 minus root 5 by 2 is outside this circle of radius 1 around 1, and 1 plus root 5 by 2 is inside the circle. So I'll break up the integrand as 3z minus 4 upon z minus 1 minus root 5 by 2 upon z minus 1 plus root 5 by 2. Yeah, this is just a matter of checking which value lies where the poles are and which pole lies inside the circle and which lies outside. So 1 minus root 5 by 2 is a distance more than 1 from 1. So that's not a. So this is 0 minus, again Cauchy integral formula tells you 3z minus 4 upon z minus 1 minus root 5 upon 2. Substitute z equal to 1 plus root 5 upon 2. And it's a simple calculation. Of course, I won't discuss these little calculations, which are very simple. Substituting and rearranging terms is not something that we should be discussing in these lectures. So you get final answer root 5 minus 3 upon 2. Yeah, I have done these calculations quite carefully, but in case somebody finds an error, please point it out to me. Any doubts?
No, I think it's fine.
Okay, so let's see the next example. So I equal to integration mod z equal to 3 z raised to 9 plus 1 upon z cube minus, z6 minus 1. So this is z cube into z6 minus 1 plus z cube plus 1 upon z6 minus 1. So this is integration. So break up the numerator. You have broken up the numerator into z cube into z6 minus 1 plus z cube plus 1. So this becomes integration z cube on mod z equal to 3 plus integration z cube plus 1 upon z6 minus 1 on mod z equal to 3. The first one is 0, Cauchy's theorem, plus integration 1 upon z cube minus 1 on mod z equal to 3. And we have seen that this is equal to 0 by an earlier exercise. 1 upon z cube minus 1 integral is 0 on circle of radius. Maybe there the radius was 6, but radius 3, same computation works. So this is equal to 0. Okay. So let's now compute dz upon z times z cube plus 2z plus 3z minus 7. So this is an example where we can estimate the location of the poles without actually locating them precisely. How do we do that? Let's take the function z cube plus 3z minus 7. So when I restrict it to the real axis, this is an odd degree polynomial. So there are two possibilities. So it has either 3 real roots or 1 real root and 2 complex conjugate roots. Yeah, odd degree polynomial with real coefficients always has a real root. So it has either 1 real root or 3 real roots. If it has 3 real roots, then fine. If it has 1 real root, then the other 2 are complex conjugates. Now just by observation, at z equal to 1, this function is minus 3. And at z equal to 2, its value is 7. Yeah, I'm taking z cube. I'm considering the function z cube plus 3z minus 7 presently. So at z equal to 1, its value is negative. At z equal to 2, its value is positive. And so by the intermediate value theorem, it has a real root between 1 and 2. Now look at the derivative of z cube plus 3z minus 7. What the derivative is 3z square plus 3, which is always positive for real values of z. So it is a strictly increasing function. And so it has at most 1 real root. You have a strictly increasing function on the real line. It can only have 1 root. At most 1 root, but we have already found 1 root between 1 and 2. So it has exactly 1 root. So we have located 1 real root between 1 and 2. So this is the only real root. Hence the other 2 roots are complex conjugates, say alpha and alpha bar, and hence they have the same magnitude. So since the product of the roots is 7, namely the constant term, with a negative sign in this case because there are 3 of them. The product of the roots is 7. So we find that this real root beta times mod alpha square is 7. But beta is between 1 and 2, remember. So mod alpha square is more than 1. In fact, it's more than 2, but certainly more than 1. So each of these alpha and alpha bar are both have magnitude more than 1. Both both complex conjugate roots have magnitude more than 1, and hence all the roots of this z cube plus 3z minus 7 are outside the unit circle, and so this function is holomorphic inside the unit circle. Hence, by Cauchy integral formula, integral mod z equal to 1 upon z times z cube plus 3z minus 7 is equal to the value of 1 upon z cube plus 3z minus 7 evaluated at 0, which is equal to minus 1 by 7. Is the example clear?
2 pi I is missing everywhere in
2
this.
pi I is missing, I'm sorry. 2 pi I times minus 1 by 7. Sorry, should make that change.
In the previous examples as well.
Okay. Was that okay? This was 0, so I'm saved. Oh, there is a 2 pi I here as well. I'm sorry about the 2 pi. I've forgotten the 2 pi I. 2 pi I here in this example as well. Here I have put the 2 pi I. So in example 3 is there is a 2 pi I. In example 5 there is a 2 pi I. I'll make the changes in the slides. Yeah, no matter how hard I try, there is always some little bit mistake somewhere.
Sir, also, there's a small typo while defining the integral in the curve is defined that there's no closing modulus same.
Okay, mod z equal to 1, but that okay, that's understood. Okay, mod z equal to 1. Okay. So these are 5 examples. In subsequent lectures also we will discuss many more examples. So let's come to another topic now. I hope this is okay, right? Is there a need for me to quickly repeat this, or is it okay? Yeah, I guess the point should be of this example should be clear. I mean, factorizing polynomials is not easy. We know that, right? But sometimes just by this kind of little observations here and there, you can estimate the values of the poles. And sometimes that proves to be enough. Explicitly calculating the poles is not easy. So now let's move on to another topic, singularities. So I have already been using the word pole a few times and so on, but now let us time to sort of systematically understand singularities. So many times one has the situation where omega is an open set and f is a holomorphic function on the complement of a certain subset. The points of the subset are called the singularities of the function. And given the rigid nature of holomorphic functions, we get a lot of information on the nature of the singularities essentially by looking at the functions in small punctured neighborhoods of these points. So let us see this in more detail. So it's sometimes what will happen is you will have a function which is not holomorphic on all of omega, but it will be holomorphic on omega minus a certain closed subset. And you want to understand what kind of singularity it is at each of the points in the closed subset and the nature of the function in small punctured neighborhoods of that point give you a very good understanding of the nature of the singularities. So singularity of a function, the set of points in omega where f is not defined or not holomorphic are called singularities of omega. For example, if I take the function 1 by z defined on C star, this has a singularity at 0. So singularities are of two types, isolated and non-isolated singularities. A singular point is said to be isolated if the function is holomorphic in a punctured disk around that point. Let me recall, punctured disk around a point simply means you take a small open disk around that point and remove that point. So a singular point is said to be isolated if the function is holomorphic in a punctured disk around that point. That means it's not holomorphic. Once you remove that point, it's holomorphic nearby. For example, 1 by z is holomorphic in any punctured neighborhood around origin. 1 upon z times z minus 1 has two singular points, namely 0 and 1, and both of which are isolated singularities. The function is holomorphic in a punctured disk of radius 1 around both of them. So a singularity is non-isolated if it is not isolated. So we have defined isolated first, and if it's not isolated, then you call it non-isolated. So that is in no punctured neighborhood of the singularity is the function holomorphic. So a simple example is if you take fz equal to mod z, has all points as singularities and hence no point is an isolated singularity. So any doubts either from the previous slide or this slide?
The value of the function need not be infinite at the singularity.
It need not be infinite. It may not be, for example, it may not be defined or it may not be holomorphic.
Sir, can you please explain isolated and non-isolated again?
So isolated, so maybe I haven't, so isolated means at some point z naught, the singularity is isolated if z naught, if near z naught, all the other points, the function is holomorphic. in a sufficiently small neighborhood around Z0, if you remove Z0, at all the other points it is holomorphic. So choose a small open disk around Z0, then remove Z0, and there it is holomorphic. If that happens, you call it a isolated singularity. And a singularity which is not isolated is a non-isolated singularity. So just unraveling the definition, when a singularity is non-isolated, if no matter how small a punctured neighborhood I take of a point, the function is not holomorphic there. Yeah, is it now clear?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.